Welcome to Sleepy Mind Lab. Tonight we're exploring one of the most fascinating territories of the human experience, the glitches in our minds. Not errors, exactly. Not something broken that needs fixing. But rather, the peculiar ways our brains interpret reality, the gentle bugs in our operating system that make us wonderfully, impossibly human. Think about it for a moment. Right now, as you're settling in, your mind is doing something extraordinary. It's filtering billions of pieces of information, light, sound, sensation, memory, and from that overwhelming flood, it's constructing a single, coherent experience of reality, the reality you're experiencing right now. But here's the thing, that reality is not the world. It's a construction. It's your brain's best guess, shaped by what you're paying attention to, what you've experienced before, what you expect to find. And sometimes, quite often, actually, your brain's best guess is completely wrong. Let's begin with the first glitch, and it's one of the most unsettling once you understand it. Glitch 1. Inattentional blindness. There's a famous experiment you might have heard of. Researchers show people a video of two teams, one in white shirts, one in black shirts, passing a basketball. The task is simple: count how many times the white team passes the ball. It requires focus. It requires attention. And so viewers concentrate, their minds narrowing, filtering out everything irrelevant. About halfway through, something remarkable happens. A man in a gorilla suit walks directly across the court. Not quickly, not in the periphery. Right through the center of the action. He even stops and beats his chest. For several seconds, he's right there. And roughly half the people watching don't see him. They have no memory of a gorilla. When asked if anything unusual happened, they look confused. There was no gorilla. There couldn't have been. They would have seen it. This is inattentional blindness. And it's not a failure of your eyes. It's a feature of your mind. Your brain receives roughly 11 million bits of sensory information per second. Your conscious mind can process about 40 bits per second. So what your brain does is make a decision: what matters right now? What deserves the precious resource of your attention? Everything else gets filtered out, dropped, deleted. It's not stored in your memory because you never consciously perceived it in the first place. When you're focused on counting basketball passes, your brain has decided that counting is what matters. A gorilla is irrelevant data, so it gets discarded. Your visual system sees it, the light hits your retina, the neural signals fire, but it never reaches consciousness. You were looking directly at it, and yet you didn't see it. Think about what this means for your daily life. Right now, there are countless things happening in your environment that you're not seeing. The ambient hum of electricity, the slight movement of air from ventilation, the texture of the fabric touching your skin. Until you pay attention to something, it doesn't exist in your conscious world. And the things you're attending to, the things that feel so vivid, so real, so obviously there, are actually the things your brain has decided matter, which raises a question that sits somewhere between unsettling and liberating. What are you not seeing right now? What's in your visual field, available to your senses, but filtered out? What gorillas are walking through your life that you'll never know about, because your attention was elsewhere? There's a deeper implication here. Your experience of reality isn't a direct perception of what's out there. It's a highly curated, extremely filtered version. Your brain is constantly making bets about what matters, and those bets shape everything. They shape what you notice, what you remember, what you believe about the world, and you experience it as direct perception. You feel like you're seeing everything. That's the glitch. That's where the illusion lies, not in what you see, but in the confidence that you're seeing it all. Glitch 2, change blindness. Imagine you're looking at a photograph. You're studying it carefully, the details, the colors, the composition. Then the image disappears, replaced by a blank screen for just a moment. Then another image appears. It looks similar to the first, maybe identical, or maybe something changed. Maybe an object moved. Maybe something appeared or disappeared. Your task: detect the change. This is harder than it sounds, much harder. Even with photographs side by side, old, new, flickering back and forth, people struggle to notice changes that seem, in retrospect, blindingly obvious. A person's shirt has changed color. A building in the background has vanished. The position of a chair has shifted across the room. It takes them minutes to notice what, once seen, they can't unsee. This is change blindness, and it's more prevalent than inattentional blindness. It's not just about what you're not attending to. It's about the fact that your mind doesn't monitor the world for changes. Instead, your mind constructs a sense of continuity. It tells you, this is the world, and it's stable. It builds a model, and then assumes that model is accurate until something forces an update. So when something changes, especially if it changes gradually, or if it changes in your peripheral vision, or if it happens during a natural break in your attention, your mind doesn't register the discrepancy. The model you have is still good. Your brain says, yes, that matches my internal representation. Move on. Think about a room you've lived in for years. You know it. You could navigate it in the dark. And then, one day, someone moves a chair across the room. You walk past it a dozen times before you consciously notice. You were walking past it every day and not seeing it, not because it was hidden, but because your internal model of the room didn't include that chair moved. Your brain was running on cached information. Or think about your own face. You look at it every day, or at least you see reflections of it regularly. But if you changed something about your appearance, grew a beard, lost weight, got a new haircut, there's a disorientation that lasts for weeks. Your mind didn't expect the change, so even though you're looking at your own face, it doesn't feel like yours. The change hasn't updated your internal model yet. There's something almost tender about this glitch. Your mind is building a continuous, stable world for you. It's not constantly doubting what it perceives. It's creating coherence. Yes, it sometimes fails to notice what's changed, but that failure comes from a kind of trust. Trust that the world is basically stable. Trust that if something matters, you'll be told. But it also means you're living in a somewhat static version of reality. The world is changing constantly. Cells in your body are dying and being replaced. Seasons are shifting. People are aging. Relationships are evolving. And your mind, in its quest for stability and continuity, might be missing some of that change. Might be running on outdated information about the people you love, the situations you're in, the way things are. What changes are happening around you that you haven't updated in your internal model? Glitch 3, the cocktail party effect. Imagine you're in a crowded room, dozens of conversations happening simultaneously. An overwhelming wash of sound, voices layering on top of each other, creating a kind of auditory soup. Your brain should be overwhelmed. The signal-to-noise ratio is impossible. And yet, you're not overwhelmed. You're having a perfectly coherent conversation with the person in front of you. How? How does your brain filter out dozens of conversations and isolate the one that matters? This is the cocktail party effect. Your brain is an extraordinary filter, capable of tuning out irrelevant information and focusing on a single stream. It does this by predicting what you're likely to hear. It knows you're having a conversation with this person. So it predicts the speech patterns should match their voice, the content should be relevant to your conversation. Everything that doesn't match that prediction gets suppressed. But here's where it gets interesting. Your brain isn't just passively filtering, it's listening to the other conversations too. Not consciously, but subconsciously. And if something important appears in another conversation, your name, for instance, your brain will shift your attention. Suddenly, you'll hear your name spoken across the room, and your focus will snap toward it. Even though you weren't consciously listening, even though you were deep in another conversation, your brain was monitoring, was ready to alert you to something critical. This is actually beautiful. Your mind is protecting you. It's making sure you don't miss anything vital while allowing you to focus on what matters right now. But the glitch comes when you realize that this selective filtering is happening all the time, in every moment. You're not perceiving the world. You're perceiving a filtered version of the world that your brain has decided is relevant to you, and that filter is based on your predictions, your history, your expectations, your fears. When you're in an anxious state, your brain's filter changes. It starts detecting threats. Suddenly, the ambient sounds of a room feel threatening. A pause in conversation feels like rejection. An ambiguous comment feels like criticism. Your brain is tuning the filter based on your emotional state, and you're experiencing the filtered reality as if it's objective truth. When you're in a confident, happy state, the same room, the same conversations, the same ambiguities feel welcoming, feel friendly, feel safe. The filter has changed, but you experience it as the world being different. This is the glitch. You think you're perceiving reality objectively, but you're perceiving the world through a dynamic filter that your brain is constantly adjusting based on your internal state. And you're experiencing the filtered output as if it's the unfiltered world. The cocktail party effect shows us something profound. Your mind is not a passive receptor. It's an active constructor of experience. It's constantly making decisions about what matters, what's important, what deserves attention. And those decisions are shaped by who you are, what you expect, and how you're feeling. Glitch 4, pareidolia. Look at the moon. Not right now if it's daylight, but sometime when the moon is visible. Look at its face. Yes, its face. There's a nose there, eyes there. It's looking at you. Except the moon doesn't have a face. Those features are random arrangements of craters and shadows. Your brain is imposing a structure. It's seeing a pattern where no pattern exists. It's taking chaos and organizing it into meaning. This is pareidolia, and it's everywhere. See a face in a wall outlet. See a figure in clouds. See intention in the random arrangement of clouds or trees or buildings. Your brain is a pattern-finding machine, so powerful, so relentless, that it finds patterns even when they're not there. In evolutionary terms, this was brilliant. A human ancestor on the savannah hearing a rustle in the grass faces a decision. Is this a predator or just wind? If you're wrong and it's a predator, you die. If you're wrong and it's just wind, you're momentarily frightened but fine. So natural selection favored the biased brain, the one that saw predators in rustles, that saw faces in shadows, that organized chaos into meaningful patterns. Better to be wrong about danger than fatally right about safety. This bias served us well when the world was more genuinely dangerous. But we still carry it. We're still finding faces in clouds, seeing messages in random events, organizing chaos into meaning. But the glitch isn't just about seeing faces in inanimate objects. It's deeper. Your brain is constantly trying to find meaning, to impose structure, to create narrative. You see a sequence of random events, and your mind generates a story that connects them. You see someone's ambiguous expression, and your brain fills in the emotion. You see a coincidence, and your brain generates a reason. Cause and effect, intention, meaning. Sometimes this is harmless. Seeing a face in the clouds is charming, but sometimes it's consequential. If someone doesn't respond to your text, your brain might generate a story, they're angry at me. If you lose a job, your brain might generate, I'm not good enough. If something bad happens to someone you were thinking about, your brain might generate, I somehow caused this. None of these narratives may be true. None of these patterns may be real. But your brain, this extraordinary pattern-finding machine, has generated them anyway. And once the pattern is there, it's hard to unsee. It starts organizing new information to fit the pattern. It starts finding evidence that confirms it. It starts making that imaginary pattern feel like the truth. This is where pareidolia becomes dark. This is where meaning-making becomes dangerous, because the human brain doesn't just find patterns in randomness. It finds intentions. It finds reasons. It finds meaning. And once it finds that meaning shapes how you see yourself, how you see others, how you move through the world. What patterns have you found in your own life that might be pareidolia? What stories have you generated about yourself that started as your brain organizing random chaos into apparent meaning? What faces have you seen in shadows that you're still afraid of? Glitch 5, temporal distortion. Time moves at different speeds. This is not a metaphor. This is not poetic language. This is how your brain actually works. When you're bored, an hour feels like 3 hours. When you're engaged, 3 hours feel like 1 hour. When you're frightened, seconds stretch. When you're in flow, hours compress. You've experienced this. Everyone has. And we usually dismiss it as subjective experience, as feeling rather than reality. But something deeper is happening. Your brain is literally processing time differently depending on your internal state. There's a psychological phenomenon called subjective time. And it's not stable. It changes based on how many novel experiences you're having, how much attention you're paying, how stimulated your mind is. When you're young, every day is new. Christmas lasts forever because you're experiencing so much novelty that your brain is encoding many distinct memories. Each memory is another moment, so time feels long. When you're older, years blur because most days are repetitions of previous days. Your brain isn't creating many new memories, so there are fewer distinct moments, and time feels like it's flying. This is actually terrifying when you think about it. As you age, time accelerates. Not objectively, but in your experience. Your subjective experience of time. The quality of time as you live it is shrinking. A year when you're 60 is a smaller fraction of your total life, and also feels faster because it contains less novelty. But there's something else happening too. In moments of extreme stress or fear, time dilates, seconds stretch. This is called tachypsychia. Your brain is flooding with adrenaline. Your senses are heightened. You're encoding many more distinct moments in those few seconds. So when you recall them later, there are more memories, more distinct moments, and it feels like more time passed. Your brain experienced more in those few seconds than it typically experiences in many minutes. So 5 seconds of terror can feel like 5 minutes. This is why car accidents feel like they happen in slow motion. This is why near-death experiences are recalled as an eternity of moments. This is why your most traumatic memories feel extended, while years of your life disappear in retrospect. The glitch is this: you think you're experiencing time objectively. You think a second is a second, an hour is an hour, but your brain is constantly warping time, stretching it, compressing it. The rate at which you experience time is not fixed, it's fluid. It's determined by how much novelty you're perceiving, how much attention you're paying, what emotional state you're in. So the question becomes, how much of your life are you actually experiencing? If you go through a routine day with no novelty, few distinct moments being encoded, is that day even really there? Does it exist in your subjective timeline? Or has it been compressed into near nothing, lost to the acceleration of time? There's a meditation practice that suggests deliberately introducing novelty, deliberately paying attention to ordinary moments, as a way of making time richer, fuller, longer. Not because it actually changes the clock, but because it changes how your brain encodes experience. More novel moments means more memories. More memories means more subjective time. You don't live longer, but you live more fully. Time becomes richer. This glitch might actually be offering us something, an invitation to wake up, to notice, to create novelty in our own lives. Because time is already distorting. We're already losing days and years to compression and routine. We might as well choose where the stretching happens. Glitch 6, the spotlight effect. You're in a room. You've made a minor social error. Maybe you said something awkward. Maybe you tripped slightly. Maybe your shirt has a stain you just noticed. And immediately your mind floods with shame. Everyone saw. Everyone noticed. Everyone is judging you. Except they're not. They didn't notice. Or they noticed and forgot about it 3 seconds later. They were thinking about themselves, about their own minor social transgressions, about whether anyone noticed their mistakes. They were in their own spotlight. This is the spotlight effect. The belief that other people notice and remember your behavior and appearance much more than they actually do. Your mistakes feel monumental to you. They're happening to you, at the center of your experience. So you assume they're equally visible to everyone else. But everyone else is the center of their own experience. You're peripheral to them, a bit player in their story. The spotlight effect is particularly cruel because it gets worse the more you focus on your mistake. You become hyper-aware of your shirt stain, so you keep looking at it, keep touching it, keep making it a central part of your experience. And you assume everyone else is doing the same. Everyone is noticing your stain. Everyone is staring. But they're not. They're worried about their own stains, their own awkwardness, their own mistakes. Here's what's strange, though. The spotlight effect is real. People don't notice us as much as we think they do. But there's a related effect called the illusion of transparency. This one suggests that we think people can read our internal states more than they actually can. We're feeling anxious, so we assume people can see that we're anxious. We're feeling depressed, so we assume people can sense that something's wrong. We're feeling lonely, so we assume it's obvious to everyone we meet. It's not. Most people have no idea what you're feeling unless you tell them. Your internal state is invisible. Your thoughts are private. Your emotions are internal. But you experience them as broadcast, as visible, as written across your face. So you have this strange contradiction. You think people notice your external behavior more than they do, and your internal state more than they do. You're either broadcasting or invisible, depending on which glitch you're experiencing. The reality is probably somewhere in between. People notice you sometimes. They forget about it. They're often too absorbed in their own experience to fully register yours. But they also have moments of genuine attention, genuine presence with you. And in those moments, they might actually see you quite clearly. The glitch isn't just in your overestimation of being noticed. It's in your certainty about what's true. You feel the eyes on you, and you're certain they're there. You feel your emotion is visible, and you're certain it shows. You feel your mistake was monumental, and you're certain everyone saw. But you're often just wrong. And because you're certain, you act as if it's true. You hide. You withdraw. You apologize for mistakes no one noticed. You perform for an audience that isn't watching. What would change if you understood that no one was watching as closely as you think? What would you do differently if you really believed, that people are much more absorbed in their own lives than in judging yours? Glitch 7. False memories. You have a memory. You're quite certain of it. You remember exactly what happened, what people said, what you felt. The memory is vivid. It feels real. It is real in the sense that it genuinely exists in your mind, that you're genuinely recalling it. But it might not be accurate. The memory might be a reconstruction. The details might be invented. The emotion might be imposed from a later time. The memory might be something you've constructed so many times, told so many times, that you can no longer distinguish between what actually happened and what you've imagined. This is false memory, not lying, not deliberate fabrication, but genuine recall of something that didn't happen the way you remember it. There's a famous study where researchers implanted a memory in people's minds. They convinced people that they had been lost in a mall when they were young, that they had been frightened, that a security guard had found them. They used suggestive questioning and false information, and people began to remember it. They generated memories of what the mall looked like, what they were wearing, what they felt. The memories were vivid, but they were false. The event never happened. This happens more often than we'd like to admit. Memories are not recordings. They're reconstructions. Every time you recall a memory, you're rebuilding it. You're gathering the fragments and pieces and assembling them into a coherent narrative. And each time you rebuild it, you have an opportunity to alter it, to add detail, to reshape it based on new information or new feelings. Your emotional state when you recall a memory shapes how you reconstruct it. If you're currently angry at someone, that memory of an ambiguous interaction gets reconstructed in an angrier light. The words they said get interpreted as more cutting. The tone gets harsher. You're not deliberately changing the memory, but you're rebuilding it through the lens of your current emotional state. And the next time you recall it, you might recall this altered version. Traumatic memories seem vivid and unchanging, but they're actually particularly susceptible to fragmentation and alteration. They can splinter into pieces. Details can be displaced or confused. The story can change subtly over time. This is the glitch. Your most confident memories might be the ones most shaped by suggestion, emotion, and reconstruction. The memories that feel most real to you, that you're most certain about, might be the ones that are most altered. And yet they feel like truth. They feel like direct perception of the past, like recordings playing back. But they're not, they're stories. Beautiful, coherent, emotionally rich stories that your brain has constructed. They're true in the sense that they reflect something real, something you experienced. But they might not be true in the details. The facts might be rearranged. The emotions might be projected backward. The meaning might be imposed from the present. This is particularly true for memories from childhood. By the time you're an adult, you might have recalled a childhood memory hundreds of times. You might have told it as a story dozens of times. You might have talked about it in therapy, explained it to friends, written it down. Each time you recall it, you're reconstructing it. Each telling alters it slightly. After decades, the memory you have might be quite different from what actually happened. And the strange thing is that false memories feel just like true memories. There's no special marker, no way to distinguish them in real time. Only later, when other evidence contradicts them. Or when you learn about the malleability of memory, do you realize that you might have been wrong? What memories are you most certain about? What stories do you tell about yourself again and again? Are those stories true, or have they become true in the retelling? Have they been reshaped by emotion, by suggestion, by the countless times you've reconstructed them? Glitch 8, cryptomnesia. You have an idea. It feels original. You've thought of something clever, something unique, something that feels like it came from your own mind. You're proud of it, you share it, and then someone tells you, that's from that book, or that movie, or that song, or that conversation you had 3 years ago and completely forgot about. Your idea wasn't original, it was borrowed. But you didn't deliberately borrow it. You genuinely thought you had come up with it. You'd forgotten where you learned it, forgotten that you'd heard it before, and so when your mind retrieved the idea, it felt new. This is cryptomnesia, hidden memory, the phenomenon where you remember the information, but forget the source. So you're left with content without context, a fact without the place it came from, an idea without its origin. This happens all the time. You read something years ago, the book goes out of your life, but the idea stays in your mind, floating free from its source. Years later, you think of it, and it feels like your own thought. You develop it further, elaborate on it, and now it feels even more original. You've added your own layer to it, so it must have come from you, right? Or you overhear a conversation at a coffee shop. Someone shares an interesting observation. You don't consciously register it, but it lodges somewhere in your mind. Weeks later, you think of it, and it comes to you as a new realization, something you've figured out yourself. Cryptomnesia is the source amnesia that creates false novelty, and it's deeply implicated in plagiarism, not intentional plagiarism, but the plagiarism of someone who genuinely doesn't remember where an idea came from. They're not lying when they say they came up with it. They genuinely don't know that they didn't. There's something unsettling about cryptomnesia, because it suggests that the boundary between you and the information you've absorbed is much more porous than you realize. You think of yourself as the author of your own thoughts, but your thoughts are constructed from countless inputs, countless influences, countless sources. Most of them you're not aware of. Most of them you've forgotten. So you're constantly weaving together threads that come from all over, believing the resulting tapestry is your own creation. In one sense, this is beautiful. It suggests that creativity is not about pure originality, but about synthesis, about taking inputs from everywhere and recombining them in new ways, about standing on the shoulders of giants without always knowing where the ground is. But in another sense, it's a kind of profound forgetting. You're living with ghosts. The people who influenced you, the books you read, the conversations you had, they're still there, still shaping your thoughts, still living in your mind. But you've forgotten them. They're present but invisible. You're thinking their thoughts while believing they're your own. The glitch is in the certainty. You're certain this is your thought. You're certain this is your idea, and that certainty is often unjustified. But it feels justified. The thought is present in your mind. It feels recent, like it just occurred to you. So you assume you just thought it. Glitch 9, framing effect. You're offered two options. In one frame, the option is presented as a gain. In another frame, the same option is presented as a loss. The actual outcome is identical, but your choice changes depending on how it's framed. This is the framing effect, and it suggests something radical. Your decisions aren't based on objective reality. They're based on how reality is presented to you. Here's a famous example. Imagine a disease is going to kill 600 people. 2 treatment options are available. One is sure. One is risky. If the treatments are framed as gains, 200 people will be saved. People tend to choose the sure option. They prefer the certainty of saving some lives to the risk of saving more or none. But if the exact same treatments are framed as losses, 400 people will die. People tend to choose the risky option. They prefer to gamble, to risk losing everyone, rather than accept the certainty of loss. The math is identical. The outcome is identical. The only thing that changed is how it was framed, and your preference flipped. Your decision was not based on the actual probability or the actual outcome. It was based on whether you were thinking in terms of gains or losses. This is profound. This means that decisions you believe are objective, based on rational evaluation of facts, are actually highly susceptible to the framing of those facts. Not the facts themselves, the framing, the context, the language. When you see a price that says, was 100, now 60 users, you feel like you're getting a deal. The frame is gain. When you see a price that says 60 euros, you don't feel the same surge of excitement, even though the outcome is identical. The frame shapes the experience. When someone says, we're going to have to lay off 10% of staff, versus we're going to keep 90% of our team, the frame changes the emotional impact, even though the reality is identical. One frame is a loss, one frame is a gain, and your emotional response changes accordingly. Advertisers understand this deeply. They frame products as solutions to problems, as ways to avoid loss rather than gain benefits, as rare and limited and special. They're not lying about the product. They're just choosing a frame that makes you more likely to choose it. Politicians understand this too. The same policy can be framed as freedom or as regulation, as protection or as restriction, as opportunity or as threat. The frame determines how you feel about it. The glitch is in the assumption that you're making decisions based on facts. You think you're rationally evaluating options, but you're actually making decisions based on how those options are framed. And the frame can be manipulated without changing the facts. Your mind is responding to the language, the context, the presentation, not the underlying reality. This is where understanding the glitch becomes liberating. If you can recognize that a choice is being framed a certain way, you can reframe it. You can say, let me look at this another way. Let me see what the same choice looks like from a different frame. And sometimes, when you look at it differently, you realize you would have chosen differently. This is why it's important to seek out perspectives that are opposite to your own, to deliberately expose yourself to people who frame things differently than you do. Because your current frame feels like truth. It feels like the only way to see it, but it's just one frame among many. And depending on which frame you're looking through, the entire choice landscape changes. Glitch 10, choice-induced dissonance. You make a choice. It feels good in the moment. You've decided. You're committed. You feel good about it. And then, immediately, doubt creeps in. The moment you've committed to the choice, you start doubting whether it was the right choice. You start thinking about the option you didn't choose, and that unchosen option suddenly looks better. This is choice-induced dissonance, also called cognitive dissonance or post-decision dissonance. The moment you choose, you experience regret for the road not taken. There's research suggesting that this regret is a feature of human consciousness, not a bug. It's a mechanism to prevent us from being too committed to decisions, to keep us flexible, to make us second, guess ourselves and potentially change course if the chosen path isn't working out. But it also means that making choices is inherently painful for humans. Every choice is a small death. Every yes is a no to something else. And you feel that loss the moment you commit. People often try to avoid this by not choosing. They delay. They keep their options open. They refuse to commit. Because as long as you haven't chosen, both options still feel viable. Both futures are still possible. The moment you choose, one of those futures closes forever. This is why some people struggle with commitment in relationships. It's not that the person isn't right for them. It's that the moment they commit, they lose access to all the other possible people, all the other possible futures. And that loss, that dissonance, creates doubt. It's also why people often justify their choices extensively. Once you've chosen, your mind works overtime to convince you that you chose correctly. It searches for reasons why the chosen option is better than the unchosen option. It highlights the negative aspects of the thing you didn't choose. It minimizes the positive aspects. It's not doing this consciously, but it's reorganizing your perception to reduce the dissonance, to make you feel good about the choice you made. This is sometimes called the justification of effort. If you've made a choice, especially if the choice involved sacrifice or effort, your mind becomes especially invested in believing that choice was right, because the alternative is to believe that you sacrificed or exerted effort for something that wasn't worth it. That's intolerable. So your mind finds ways to make it worth it retroactively. The glitch is that choice always creates dissonance, and dissonance creates regret, and regret creates doubt. So no matter what you choose, part of you will be wondering if you chose wrong. Part of you will be mourning the unchosen option. Part of you will be second-guessing. And because you can't live with that dissonance indefinitely, your mind gets busy, spinning narratives that justify the choice you made, making the chosen option look better than it is, making the unchosen option look worse than it is. This is where the danger lies. You're not objectively evaluating whether you made the right choice. You're not updating your decision based on real feedback. You're caught in a loop of justification, defending the choice you made rather than honestly assessing it. The antidote, perhaps, is acceptance. It's accepting that every choice involves loss. It's accepting that you will doubt your choices. It's accepting that the unchosen option will always retain some appeal, some sense of what might have been. And it's accepting that this is part of being human. This is what choice costs us. But it's also, perhaps, an invitation to choose more carefully, to choose knowing that doubt will follow, that regret will follow, to choose things that matter enough to be worth the doubt, worth the regret, worth the loss of other possibilities. The moment of choice closes doors, but it also opens them. And maybe the pain of closure is the price we pay for the possibility of opening new doors. As we drift deeper into these glitches, into the strange bugs in our minds, you might notice something beginning to happen. You might notice that you're becoming more aware of your own thinking, more aware of how your mind constructs reality. And as that awareness grows, something shifts. The certainty you felt starts to soften. The things that felt objectively true start to feel more like constructions. And that's when the real learning begins. That's when you start to see not just the glitches, but the landscape underneath them. The vast, mysterious process by which consciousness becomes experience, by which mind becomes world. Glitch 11, confirmation bias. You have a belief. Maybe it's about politics. Maybe it's about another person. Maybe it's about how the world works. The belief feels true to you. You can feel the truth of it in your bones. And so you begin to notice things that confirm it. Someone does something ambiguous. Your brain interprets it in a way that confirms your belief. You see a news headline that resonates with your belief. You remember it. You forget the headlines that contradict it. You encounter someone who agrees with you about the belief. You think they're wise. You encounter someone who disagrees. You think they're foolish or biased or not paying attention. You're not doing this deliberately. You're not consciously distorting information. But your mind is running a filter. It's highlighting confirming information and downplaying contradicting information. It's noticing confirmations and forgetting contradictions. It's organizing reality in a way that coheres with what you already believe. This is confirmation bias, and it's one of the most pervasive biases in human reasoning. It's the reason that people can look at the same evidence and come to completely different conclusions. Not because the evidence is ambiguous. Well, often because the evidence is ambiguous, but also because their filters are different. Their priors are different. Their beliefs are different. And so the same information gets interpreted completely differently. Imagine two people reading the same article about a political candidate. One person thinks the candidate is good. One person thinks the candidate is bad. They read the exact same words. But the first person notices the accomplishments and sees vision. They notice the ambiguous statements and interpret them charitably. They notice the criticisms and dismiss them as partisan attacks. The second person notices the same accomplishments and sees pandering. They notice the same ambiguous statements and interpret them as evasion. They notice the same criticisms and see evidence of wrongdoing. The article didn't change. The evidence didn't change. The filter changed. And the filter is confirmation bias. What makes this particularly insidious is that confirmation bias makes you more confident in your beliefs, not less. The more confirming information you notice, the more confident you become that you're right. The contradicting information gets discarded, so you're not bothered by it. You're surrounded by confirmations, and so your belief feels more and more obviously true. This is why intelligent people can be trapped in false beliefs. Intelligence doesn't protect you from confirmation bias. If anything, it makes it worse. Intelligent people are better at finding confirmation. They're better at generating arguments that support their position. They're better at dismissing contradictions as exceptions or errors. The glitch is that confirmation bias feels like objectivity. When you're filtering information without realizing it, when you're interpreting ambiguous evidence in a way that happens to confirm your belief, it feels like you're just noticing what's obviously there. It feels like reality is confirming your belief. You don't feel like you're filtering. You feel like you're perceiving truth. This is why stepping outside your own beliefs is so difficult. This is why people in different political parties can seem so delusional to each other. They're not delusional. They're just operating with different filters. They're paying attention to different information. They're interpreting ambiguous information differently. The antidote to confirmation bias is doubt. It's deliberately seeking out information that contradicts your beliefs. It's listening to people who disagree with you, not to ridicule them, but to understand where they're coming from. It's questioning your own certainty. It's recognizing that confirmation bias is happening in your mind right now, that you're filtering information and asking, what am I not seeing? What contradictions am I dismissing? What would need to be true for my belief to be wrong? Glitch 12. The backfire effect. You encounter information that contradicts something you believe. You read a study. You hear an argument. You're confronted with evidence that you might be wrong. What happens? Sometimes you update your belief. You integrate the new information. You change your mind. Good. That's how learning works. But sometimes something different happens. You encounter information that contradicts your belief, and instead of updating your belief, you become more confident in the opposite. The contradicting information makes you believe the false thing even more strongly. This is the backfire effect, sometimes called the boomerang effect, when evidence against your belief actually strengthens the belief rather than weakening it. Why would this happen? One theory involves cognitive dissonance. When you encounter information that contradicts a central belief, you experience discomfort. That discomfort creates motivation to resolve it. And one way to resolve it is to dismiss the contradicting information, to find reasons not to believe it, to find ways to interpret it that don't actually contradict your belief. And in doing that dismissal, you're actually reaffirming your original belief even more strongly. Another theory involves identity. Some beliefs are not just beliefs. They're part of who you are, their identity claims. If you believe in a political position, that belief might be tied up with your identity, your sense of belonging to a group, your sense of what kinds of people are good and what kinds are bad. When someone attacks that belief, you feel like they're attacking you, and you defend yourself. You defend your identity. You defend the belief even more strongly. There's also something called the illusory truth effect. The more times you're exposed to a statement, the more true it feels, regardless of whether it's actually true. So if you hold a false belief, and that belief gets repeated in your community, in your media environment, in your own thoughts, it becomes more and more true seeming. And when someone provides evidence against it, the evidence seems weak and unconvincing compared to the sense of truth the repeated statement has built up. The backfire effect is the glitch where you don't just resist new information. You actively use it to strengthen your existing belief. The contradicting information becomes a weapon that you use against yourself without realizing it. But here's the question: is the backfire effect real? Research on this is actually contested. Some studies show it, some studies don't. It seems to depend on the specific belief, the specific context, the specific way the contradiction is presented. But whether it's universal or contextual, the phenomenon is real enough that we're aware of it. People do hold false beliefs in the face of contradicting evidence. People do sometimes become more confident in false things when challenged. The glitch is in the machinery of belief maintenance. Your mind is not designed to find truth. It's designed to maintain stability, to maintain coherence, to maintain identity. And when you encounter information that threatens that stability, your mind fights back. It organizes a defense. It finds reasons to dismiss the threat. And in doing that, it might be throwing out true information and strengthening false beliefs. Glitch 13, the Dunning-Kruger effect. Imagine two groups of people. One group is very knowledgeable about a topic. One group knows very little. Both groups are asked to rate their own knowledge. The knowledgeable group rates themselves as moderately knowledgeable. They know how much they don't know. They know that there are depths they haven't plumbed, subtleties they haven't explored. They're aware of their limitations. So they rate themselves as better than average, but not exceptional. The unknowledgeable group rates themselves as very knowledgeable. They don't know what they don't know. They have a few facts and some confidence, so they assume they know most of what's important. They're aware of a few gaps, but they assume those gaps are small. They rate themselves as quite knowledgeable, maybe even exceptional. This is the Dunning-Kruger effect. The observation that incompetent people tend to overestimate their competence, while competent people tend to underestimate theirs. The less you know, the more confident you are. The more you know, the more aware you become of everything you don't know. This is sometimes called the confidence-competence paradox. There's an inverse relationship. As you actually become more competent, your confidence initially drops because you become aware of what you were ignorant about. Only at very high levels of competence does confidence start to increase again, because you're now confident enough to know what's worth knowing. So in the middle, competent people are often less confident than incompetent people. The competent person, who might actually be quite skilled, sees their skills in context of all they don't know. The incompetent person sees their skills in isolation and concludes they're pretty good. This has profound implications. In any domain, politics, medicine, parenting, engineering, the people making the loudest pronouncements, the most confident declarations, are often the people who know the least. They have just enough knowledge to be confident, but not enough to be aware of what they don't know. Meanwhile, the actual experts are often quiet. They're hedging. They're saying, depends, and we don't fully know, and there are multiple perspectives. They sound less certain because they are less certain. Not in the sense of being uncertain, but in the sense of being aware of the complexity, the edge cases, the places where the knowledge breaks down. The glitch is in the disconnect between confidence and competence. Your confidence is not a reliable indicator of your actual skill. You can be very confident and completely wrong. You can be uncertain and actually quite right. The relationship between what you think you know and what you actually know is not what it appears to be. There's a humbling element to the Dunning-Kruger effect. It suggests that everyone, at some point, is incompetent and confident. Everyone starts out not knowing what they don't know. And as you learn, as you become competent, that initial confidence drops. You become aware of all the ways you could be wrong. You become cautious. The question is whether you let that caution paralyze you or whether you let it inform you. Whether you use the awareness of what you don't know to keep learning, to keep questioning, to keep improving, or whether you let it undermine your confidence in what you do know. Glitch 14, clustering illusion. You flip a coin 10 times. You get heads 6 times, tails 4 times. You notice there were 3 heads in a row near the beginning and 3 tails in a row near the end. There's a pattern. Maybe the coin is biased. Maybe there's something going on. Except there's not. With 10 coin flips, you expect some runs of identical results just by chance. The human mind is a pattern recognition machine, so when it sees a run of heads, it interprets it as meaningful. It interprets it as a pattern. It interprets it as evidence of something. This is the clustering illusion, the tendency to see patterns in random data, to see clusters and clusters of randomness and interpret them as meaningful clusters. This is why people become convinced that they're unlucky or lucky. They remember the times when bad things clustered together and interpret it as a streak of bad luck. They remember the times when good things clustered together and interpret it as a streak of good luck. But they're just remembering clusters that happened by chance. This is why people see trends in random fluctuations. The stock market goes up 3 days in a row, and people see a bull run emerging. The market goes down 3 days in a row, and people see a crash coming. But they're just seeing random fluctuations and interpreting them as meaningful trends. This is why people believe in hot hands in basketball. A player makes 3 shots in a row, and they look like they're in a rhythm, like they have momentum, like they're hot. But research suggests that basketball shots are largely independent events. A player who made the last shot is not actually more likely to make the next shot. But because we cluster the makes together and call it a hot hand, we think we're seeing something real. The glitch is in the assumption that clusters are meaningful. Your mind is so oriented toward pattern finding, toward looking for order and structure, that it finds patterns even in randomness. And once it finds a pattern, it starts looking for explanations. It starts constructing narratives. It starts making predictions based on a pattern that may be illusory. This becomes particularly dangerous when you're dealing with low-frequency, high-consequence events. If something bad happens, your mind might automatically assume it's a sign that more bad things are about to happen. Clustering illusion turns a random bad event into an expected trend. Your mind prepares for doom, organizes information to confirm the downward trend, becomes vigilant for more bad events. Or in the opposite direction, after a series of good events, your mind might become overconfident. It interprets the cluster of good events as meaningful, as evidence of a turning point, as reason to take on more risk. And then the random fluctuation corrects and the luck runs out. And you're surprised. The antidote to clustering illusion is understanding randomness. It's understanding that random events come in clusters, that runs and streaks are expected in any random sequence, that the fact that something unlikely happened doesn't mean it's meaningful. It just means it was unlikely, and it happened anyway, which is what unlikely things do. Glitch 15, availability heuristic. What's more common? Dying in a shark attack or dying in a falling coconut accident? Most people say shark attack. Sharks are dangerous. We've seen movies. We know about shark attacks. It feels like the right answer. But it's not. Dying in a shark attack is extraordinarily rare. Dying by falling coconut is actually more common. But you don't think about falling coconuts. You don't have vivid memories of news stories about coconut accidents. Sharks, on the other hand, are available. They're vivid. They're memorable. So you think they're more common. This is the availability heuristic, the tendency to judge the probability of something based on how easily you can call it to mind. If something is readily available in your memory, if it's vivid, recent, memorable, you assume it's common. If something is hard to think of, you assume it's rare. But availability is not the same as frequency. Something can be vivid and rare. Something can be common and invisible. This is why people are often terrified of things that are statistically unlikely and unconcerned about things that are statistically likely. They're terrified of terrorism, which is rare. They're unconcerned about car accidents, which are common. Why? Because terrorism is vivid. It's memorable. It gets media coverage. Car accidents are mundane. They happen every day. They're not memorable. So terrorism feels more threatening, even though statistically, you're much more likely to die in a car accident. This is why people overestimate how many shark attacks happen in a given year. Every time they hear about a shark attack, that availability increases. The vivid story lodges in their mind. So when they're asked about shark attack frequency, they can easily imagine shark attacks, and so they guess a higher number. The glitch is in the mismatch between what you can easily remember and what's actually likely. Your heuristic is giving you the wrong answer. It's optimized for a world where what's available is what's common. But we live in a world where the media, the internet, the collective attention is unevenly distributed. Vivid things get covered. Mundane things don't. So the vivid things become more available even if they're less common. This means that your intuitive sense of risk is often wrong. You're afraid of things that aren't likely to happen to you and unconcerned about things that are likely. You're imagining vivid scenarios that haven't happened and ignoring mundane risks that are statistically more dangerous. Understanding the availability heuristic is important because it helps you realize that your sense of what's dangerous, what's likely, what's a threat, is shaped not by reality but by what's available to your mind. And what's available to your mind is shaped by media, by stories, by vivid examples. Glitch 16, survivorship bias. During World War II, the US military noticed that bombers were returning from missions with damage concentrated on the fuselage and wings. They wanted to reinforce the damage points to protect the aircraft better. It seemed logical, reinforce where the damage is. But a statistician named Abraham Wald pointed out the error. The damage pattern you're seeing is not the true damage pattern. It's the damage pattern of the survivors. The bombers that returned had been hit in the fuselage and wings and survived. But what about the bombers that didn't return? Those that got hit in the engine or cockpit didn't make it back. So you're not seeing a representative sample of where damage happens. You're seeing a biased sample of where you can survive damage. Wald suggested reinforcing the cockpit and engine, the places where no returning planes had damage, because that's where the non-returning planes must have been hit. Reinforcing where the returning planes have damage is reinforcing the places that don't need reinforcement. It's optimizing for survival of the already survived. This is survivorship bias. The tendency to see only the things that have survived and to treat that as representative of the whole, when actually it's a biased sample. The things that didn't survive are invisible. This is why successful people always have stories about hard work and determination. Well, sure. The people who worked hard and were determined and succeeded are here to tell their stories. The people who worked hard and were determined and failed are not here to tell theirs. So you see one pattern, hard work leads to success, when the full pattern includes hard work leading to failure too. This is why startup success stories are so misleading. You hear the stories of the founders who persisted through difficulties and eventually made it. You don't hear from the 1,000 founders who persisted through difficulties and went bankrupt. So you see persistence as the key to success. But the full data includes persistence leading to failure. This is why looking at the rich to understand how to become rich is misleading. The rich include people who were born rich and did nothing. They include people who made lucky investments. They include people who committed fraud and got away with it. But the poor include people who worked hard and did everything right and still couldn't escape poverty. Survivorship bias hides the poor people who did everything right. It hides the ways luck and birth matter. It shows you only the survivors and tells you their story was the typical story. The glitch is in the invisibility of the non-survivors. They're not there to contradict the narrative. They're not there to add complexity. You see the pattern in the survivors and assume it's the pattern of the whole. But you're looking at a filtered dataset. You're looking at the things that made it through to you. The things that were successful enough to be visible. The things that didn't die. Glitch 17, post hoc reasoning. Then something else happens. You assume the first caused the second. I was sick. I took vitamin C. I got better. So vitamin C made me better. Even though you probably would have gotten better anyway. Even though the body has natural recovery processes, you see the sequence and infer causation. I started a new habit. My mood improved. So the habit caused the mood improvement. Even though my mood might have been improving anyway, or another factor might have changed, or the placebo effect might be at work. This is post hoc reasoning. Latin for after this, therefore because of this. The fallacy of assuming that because two things occurred in sequence, the first caused the second. This is probably the most common reasoning error humans make, because causality and temporal sequence are often correlated. Usually, causes do come before effects. So your brain has learned, if A happened before B, probably A caused B. It's a useful heuristic most of the time. But it fails when other factors are present, when correlation masquerades as causation, when coincidence masquerades as causality. This is why people are often so convinced that remedies work even when they don't. Someone takes a homeopathic remedy and feels better. The timing suggests the remedy worked. The brain infers causation. Never mind that they were probably going to get better anyway. Never mind that the placebo effect might be doing the work. The timing suggests causation, and the brain accepts it. This is why people believe in lucky objects. Someone wears a lucky shirt and their team wins. The shirt was before the win, so the shirt caused the win. Never mind that the shirt has no causal connection to the team's performance. The temporal sequence suggests it did. This is why entire superstitions are built on post hoc reasoning. Someone does X and then something good happens. So X is a good luck charm. Someone does Y and something bad happens. So Y is bad luck. The temporal sequence creates the illusion of causation. The glitch is in the convincingness of temporal sequence. When you see one thing happen and then another thing happen, your mind wants to connect them. It wants to find the arrow pointing from first to second. And it often does, even when no arrow exists. This is particularly dangerous in fields like medicine and psychology where the placebo effect is powerful. Someone feels better after a treatment and attributes it to the treatment. The treatment is real. The improvement is real. But the causal connection might be illusory. The person might have gotten better anyway. The mind might have healed the body through expectation and belief. Understanding post hoc reasoning is important because it helps you become skeptical of your own causal inferences. When you believe something caused something else, ask yourself, did I observe the causation, or did I infer it from temporal sequence? Could other factors explain the outcome? Would the outcome have happened anyway? Glitch 18. The Texas sharpshooter fallacy. Imagine a Texan goes to a wall and fires a gun wildly, riddling the wall with bullet holes. Then he draws a bullseye around the densest cluster of holes. He's just hit a bullseye. Perfect shot. Of course, this isn't a perfect shot. He didn't aim at the wall and hit the bullseye. He shot randomly and then drew the bullseye around where he happened to shoot. The bullseye came after the shooting. It was tailored to the shot, not predictive of it. This is the Texas sharpshooter fallacy. The tendency to find or create clusters in data and then retroactively frame them as meaningful, as evidence of a pattern that was planned rather than accidental. This is what we do when we're looking for confirmations of our beliefs. We take a bunch of random events and find the clusters. We highlight the events that fit our narrative and ignore the events that don't. Then we point to the clusters and say, see, the pattern confirms my belief. A person believes that Mercury in retrograde affects their life. They notice that a few things went wrong during Mercury retrograde. They draw the bullseye around those bad events and ignore all the times things went fine during Mercury retrograde, and all the times things went badly when Mercury wasn't in retrograde. They've used Texas sharpshooter fallacy to confirm their belief. This is what we do with conspiracy theories. We take a bunch of facts and events and find the ones that fit the conspiracy narrative. We ignore the hundreds of ordinary explanations and highlight the 5 events that could fit the conspiracy. We draw a bullseye around those 5 and say, see, it's a conspiracy. The glitch is in the ability to find patterns in randomness and then forget that you found the pattern in randomness. Once the pattern is found, it feels like the pattern was always there. It feels like it was predicted by the theory rather than discovered by the pattern finding. This is why people who are good at finding patterns can be especially prone to this fallacy. If you're creative, if you're good at seeing connections, if you're good at finding how different pieces fit together, you can use that skill to find patterns in random noise. You can find the bullseye that isn't really there. The antidote is to be skeptical of patterns that emerge after the fact, to distinguish between predictions and post hoc explanations. A prediction says, I think the pattern will look like this, and then you collect data and see if it matches. A post hoc explanation finds the pattern in the data and then claims it was predicted. One is evidence. One is Texas sharpshooter fallacy. Glitch 19, the sunk cost fallacy. You're in a relationship. It's not working. You're unhappy. But you've already invested 5 years. You've already invested emotional energy, memories, maybe money. And because you've invested so much, you stay. You keep trying to make it work, because leaving would mean admitting that all that investment was wasted. This is the sunk cost fallacy. The tendency to continue an investment because you've already invested in it, even if continuing is no longer rational. The sunk cost is the money, time, effort you've already spent. That cost is sunk. It's in the past. It's gone regardless of what you do now. And yet, we make decisions based on sunk costs, as if they're relevant to the future. In economics, this is clear. If you bought a ticket to a concert for $50 and now you don't want to go, the cost of the ticket is sunk. Whether you go or not, you're not getting the $50 back. So the right decision, whether to go, should be based on whether you want to go, not on how much you spent. But often, people go to the concert they don't want to attend because they paid for it. They're trying to get their money's worth. They're optimizing for using up the sunk cost, rather than optimizing for their own happiness. This is why people finish meals they don't enjoy. They've paid for the meal. The payment is sunk. Whether they eat it or not, they don't get the money back. But they eat it anyway because they don't want to waste the money. What they're actually wasting is time and stomach space on food they don't enjoy. This is why people stay in careers they hate. They've already spent years in the field. They've already built up credentials. And because of that investment, they stay, even though they'd be happier doing something else. This is why people watch movies they're not enjoying. They've already paid. The ticket cost is sunk. But they sit through the rest of the movie anyway, letting it waste their time, because they don't want to waste the ticket. The glitch is that sunk costs shouldn't affect present decisions. The rational way to think about it is, what will make me happier from now on? Not, what will make use of the money I already spent? But your mind thinks in terms of sunk costs. It tries to get value from past investments. It doesn't want to waste things. So it continues the investment to make it feel less wasteful. But you can't recover a sunk cost. Staying in the relationship doesn't recover the 5 years. Finishing the meal doesn't recover the money spent. Continuing to sit in the movie doesn't recover the ticket price. You're just compounding the loss by continuing to invest. Understanding the sunk cost fallacy is important because it helps you make present decisions based on future benefit rather than past investment. It helps you let go of things that aren't serving you, even if you've invested in them. It helps you grieve the loss of the investment without compounding the loss through continued waste. Glitch 20, hindsight bias. After something happens, you look back and you're certain that you knew it was going to happen. You knew it all along. The outcome seems obvious in retrospect. Of course that happened, you say. I could have predicted that, but could you have? Before it happened, did you actually predict it? Probably not. You're reconstructing your past beliefs to fit the present reality. This is hindsight bias, the tendency to see past events as having been more predictable than they actually were. The future has many possibilities. Each one seems, before it happens, like one possibility among many. But once the future becomes the past, once one of those possibilities has been actualized, it suddenly seems like the only possibility. It seems like it was obvious all along. This is why people are so harsh on decision makers. A leader makes a choice that seems reasonable at the time, based on available information. The choice doesn't work out, and everyone says, of course it didn't work out. That was obviously the wrong choice, but the obviousness is only in hindsight. At the time, it wasn't obvious. The future was genuinely uncertain. This is why history seems so determined in retrospect. You read about how certain events had to happen, how the cause led inevitably to the effect, how it was all obvious and predictable. But at the time, it wasn't. The people living through it didn't know how it would turn out. They were making decisions in genuine uncertainty. The determinism is imposed by hindsight. This is why people are so overconfident in their ability to predict the future. They look back at the past, see how obvious the outcome was, and assume they're good at prediction. But what they're seeing is hindsight bias. The past wasn't obvious when it was the future. It became obvious when it became the past. The glitch is in the illusion of clarity that hindsight creates. It makes the past seem more predictable than it was. It makes it seem like the people involved were foolish, when actually they were just working with incomplete information. It makes it seem like you would have known better, when actually you would have made a similar decision in the same circumstances. This is why it's important to respect uncertainty, to remember that the future is genuinely uncertain, that many possibilities are open, that outcomes that seem obvious in retrospect were not obvious when they were possible futures. It's also why it's important to record your predictions before they become the past. To say, publicly or privately, this is what I think will happen and why. Then, when the future arrives, you can look back at what you actually predicted rather than what you think you predicted. Hindsight buyers won't have had the chance to rewrite your past beliefs. As you move deeper into these glitches, as you understand more about the ways your mind fails to reason logically, something begins to become clear. You are not broken. Your mind is not defective. You're just using shortcuts. You're just using heuristics that work well enough most of the time but fail in specific ways. And the failures are systematic. They're predictable. They're not random errors. They're consistent biases in the direction of your reasoning. And once you know the bias, once you know the direction your mind is likely to skew, you can correct for it. Not perfectly, but better than you could before. You can ask the correcting questions. You can double-check your reasoning. You can seek out the information that contradicts your bias. This is how you become wiser, not by becoming more certain, but by becoming aware of the specific ways you're uncertain. By learning the systematic glitches in your reasoning. By building in the corrections. Glitch 21, mere exposure effect. Imagine there's a person you see regularly but have never spoken to. Maybe someone in your gym. Maybe someone at your workplace. Someone you see but don't interact with. And imagine you find them mildly unattractive or neutral. Nothing special. But as you see them more and more, something shifts. They start to look more attractive, not because they've changed, but because they're becoming familiar. And familiarity breeds liking. This is the mere exposure effect. The tendency to develop a preference for something simply because you're exposed to it repeatedly. The more you hear a song, the more you like it. Even if you hated it the first time you heard it, repeated exposure tends to breed liking. The more you see a face, the more attractive it becomes. The more you're in someone's presence, the more you like them, just by virtue of being there. This is a powerful glitch. It means your preferences are not stable. They're not based on fixed qualities of the thing itself. They're based on how much you've been exposed to it. And since exposure is kind of arbitrary, what you happen to see, what happens to be around you, your preferences end up being shaped by arbitrary factors. This explains why breaking up is hard. The person you want to break up with is someone you've been heavily exposed to. They're familiar. That familiarity has bred liking, even if the relationship isn't working anymore. The liking is real. It's not based on the relationship being good. It's based on the sheer amount of exposure. This is why you like your own name. You're exposed to your own name constantly, throughout your life. So of course you like it. It's familiar. The mere exposure effect suggests that if someone had a completely different name, they'd like that name just as much if it were their name, if they were exposed to it as constantly. This explains a lot about tribal preference. The people you grow up around become familiar, and through mere exposure, you develop a preference for them, for people like them. Not because they're objectively better, but because you're exposed to them more. The glitch is in the assumption that your preferences are based on the actual qualities of the thing. You think you like something because it's good, but maybe you like it because it's familiar. Maybe your preference is not an assessment of quality, but an artifact of exposure. This has profound implications. It means that a lot of your tastes, your preferences, your likes and dislikes are determined by what you happen to have been exposed to. And since exposure is not random but shaped by where you live, what you're offered, what algorithms show you, your preferences are being shaped by forces outside your conscious awareness. It also means that if you want to like something, one strategy is just exposure. Expose yourself to it repeatedly. Gradually, it will become more familiar. And as it becomes familiar, you'll like it more. This actually works. People can literally change their preferences through exposure. Glitch 22, the halo effect. You meet someone. They're attractive, or intelligent, or successful. One positive trait stands out, and from that one trait you infer all sorts of other positive traits. They must be kind. They must be trustworthy. They must be interesting. They must have a good sense of humor. You've never interacted with them. You don't know if they're kind or trustworthy or interesting, but the one positive trait, Attractiveness, intelligence, success creates a halo, and within that halo, all sorts of other traits seem positive by default. This is the halo effect. The tendency for a positive trait to influence your judgment of other traits. The attractiveness halo, for instance, is powerful. Attractive people are judged as more intelligent, more trustworthy, more competent, kinder, more fun. Even though there's no correlation between attractiveness and these other traits, this has real consequences. In the legal system, attractive defendants are sentenced more leniently. They haven't done anything different. They've committed the same crime. But the attractiveness halo makes them seem less guilty, less dangerous, less deserving of punishment. In hiring, people with confidence often get hired for positions they're not equipped for. The confidence creates a halo. This person is confident, so they must be competent, the hiring manager thinks. And they hire someone who is great at seeming confident, but not great at the actual job. In relationships, initial attraction creates a halo. You find someone attractive, and you assume all sorts of other positive things. Then, as you get to know them, the halo starts to fade. You realize they're not as kind as you assumed. They're not as funny as you assumed. Their other traits don't match the halo the initial attraction created. The glitch is in the overgeneralization. One positive trait is creating a halo. It's making you judge other traits as if they're positive too. It's creating a composite image of a person that's much more positive than the evidence supports. This is probably why first impressions are so powerful and so misleading. The first impression is often dominated by one or two traits that are immediately observable, and those traits create a halo that overshadows everything else. You make up a story about a person based on how they look or how confident they seem in the first few minutes. And that story is hard to revise, because once the halo is there, contradicting information gets filtered out. Glitch 23, the horns effect. The inverse of the halo effect is the horns effect. One negative trait and suddenly everything else looks bad too. Someone does something unkind and they become an unkind person. Someone is rude in one interaction and they're a rude person. One flaw and a halo of negativity spreads across everything. This is the horns effect. The tendency for a negative trait to influence your judgment of other traits. A single perceived flaw creates horns. And within those horns, everything looks dark. This is why people are so harsh on politicians who make a mistake. One gaffe, one moment of poor judgment, and suddenly their intelligence is questioned, their character is suspect, their entire history is re-evaluated in a negative light. The horns spread. This is why, in relationships, one betrayal can sometimes make someone see their partner in an entirely negative light, even though most of the relationship was positive. The betrayal created horns, and within those horns, all the positive things the partner did are now reinterpreted. Were they really acts of kindness, or were they acts of manipulation? Were they really supportive, or were they controlling? The horns change how you see the past. The glitch is in the same overgeneralization as the halo effect, but in the opposite direction. You're taking limited evidence about one trait and using it to infer global negativity about the person. You're creating a composite image that's much worse than the evidence supports. The scary thing about the horns effect is that once it takes hold, it can be hard to escape. Contradicting evidence gets filtered out. You look for more evidence of the negative trait. You find it. The horns get stronger. You become convinced that the person is fundamentally flawed, when actually you're just caught in a bias that's making you see everything through a negative lens. This is why cancel culture can be so brutal and so final. One negative thing, one mistake, and the horns spread. Suddenly, everything the person has done is reinterpreted as evidence of their fundamental badness. The horns expand until the whole image of the person is consumed by darkness. Glitch 24, primacy effect. Two people sit before you. You see one first. You form an impression. Then you see the second. You form an impression. Your impression of the first person will disproportionately influence how you interpret the second person. This is the primacy effect, the tendency for early information to disproportionately influence your judgment. What you see first is weighted more heavily than what you see second, even if the information is equally relevant. When you're dating someone, The first date sets the tone for how you interpret all subsequent dates. If the first date is great, you'll interpret ambiguous moments on subsequent dates in a positive light. If the first date is terrible, you'll interpret subsequent dates through a negative lens. When you're hiring someone, the first thing they do in the interview disproportionately affects your judgment. If they make a good first impression, you'll interpret their answers favorably. If they stumble on the first question, you'll be looking for flaws in everything that follows. When you're evaluating a work of art, the first piece you encounter shapes how you interpret the rest. If you love the first piece, everything else will seem to follow from that standard. If you hate the first piece, everything else will seem disappointing by comparison. The primacy effect is sometimes called the anchoring effect. The first thing you encounter acts as an anchor. All subsequent information is interpreted relative to that anchor. If the anchor is high, everything else is low relative to it. If the anchor is low, everything else is high relative to it. The glitch is in the weighting. The first information gets weighted more heavily than it should, relative to subsequent information. You're not evaluating all the evidence equally. You're evaluating it through the lens of the first impression. This is why first impressions are so consequential and so misleading. The first few minutes of any interaction set the tone for everything that follows, and that tone might be completely unrepresentative of the overall dynamic. Glitch 25, recency effect. But wait, there's also a recency effect. The tendency for the most recent information to disproportionately influence your judgment. So you have primacy, the first information is weighted heavily, and recency, the last information is weighted heavily. Both biases exist. Which one wins? It depends on the situation. When you're making a decision right now, recency often wins. The most recent information is most salient. It's in your mind, so you weight it heavily. This is why the last thing someone says in an argument is often remembered, even if the first things they said were more important. This is why people are so influenced by recent news. The most recent news story is weighted heavily in your mind. So you overestimate how often recent events happen. You overestimate how threatening recent dangers are. The glitch is that both effects are biases. You're not weighing information equally. You're overweighting first information and overweighting recent information. You're over-anchoring on what you encountered first or last. What about the middle? What about the bulk of the information? The middle gets underweighted. The average gets downplayed. You remember the beginning and the end, and you forget the middle. So your judgments are based on 2 data points from a much larger set. This is why endings matter so much in how you remember an experience. You might have had an average experience with someone, but if it ended badly, you'll remember it as bad. The recency effect makes the ending disproportionately important, and the ending is weighted so heavily that it colors your entire memory of the experience. Glitch 26, in-group bias. You belong to a group, maybe your national group, maybe your ethnic group, maybe your political group, maybe your professional group, maybe your family. You belong to some group, and you prefer people in your group. You like them more. You trust them more. You help them more. You give them the benefit of the doubt more. Not because they're objectively better than people in other groups, but because they're in your group. This is in-group bias. The tendency to favor the people in your groups and disfavor people outside your groups. Experiments have shown this bias is remarkably strong and remarkably trivial to activate. In one experiment, researchers randomly assigned people to 2 groups based on coin flips. No interaction, no shared history, no actual difference between the groups, just you're in Group A or Group B. Then researchers asked people to distribute resources. Most people gave more resources to their own group, even though the groups were arbitrary and the other people were strangers. This is part of our evolutionary heritage. We evolved in small groups. Cooperating with your group was the key to survival. Helping your group, favoring your group, trusting your group, these were adaptive. So the bias is deep, it's ancient, it's powerful, but it becomes problematic in the modern world, because now we have arbitrary groups, arbitrary national boundaries, arbitrary ethnic categories, arbitrary political affiliations, and the in-group bias still activates. We still favor people in our group. We still distrust people outside our group. We still give our group the benefit of the doubt. This is where prejudice lives. This is where tribalism comes from. This is why your political group is always right and the other political group is always wrong. Not because your group is objectively right or wrong, but because in-group bias makes you see your group more favorably. The glitch is in the arbitrary activation of loyalty. You didn't choose your group, usually, or if you did, the choice was based on arbitrary factors. And yet the in-group bias makes the group feel deeply important. The group feels like it's objectively better than other groups. But that feeling is a bias. It's a preference for the arbitrary. Glitch 27 out-group homogeneity bias. While you're showing in-group bias toward your group, you're also showing what's called out-group homogeneity bias toward other groups. You see members of your group as diverse individuals. They're different from each other. They have unique perspectives, unique qualities. But members of other groups, they all seem the same. They're all the same type. They all think alike. They all behave alike. This is out-group homogeneity bias. The tendency to see people in other groups as homogeneous while seeing people in your group as diverse. This is why stereotypes feel true. The stereotype suggests that all people in a category are alike. And because of out-group homogeneity bias, they do seem alike. You notice the stereotype consistent cases and forget the stereotype inconsistent cases. This is why people from other countries seem so similar to each other and so foreign. They all seem to have the same culture, the same values, the same personality. But when you travel to that country and interact with people there, you realize they're diverse. They're individuals. They disagree with each other. They have different values and perspectives. The glitch is in the exaggeration of between-group difference and the minimization of within-group difference. You're seeing the out-group as more homogeneous than it actually is, and your group as more diverse than it actually is. The reality is probably somewhere in the middle. Both groups have diversity. Both groups have individuals. But that the bias makes the out-group seem foreign and monolithic, and your group seem diverse and complex. Glitch 28. False consensus effect. You have a belief about how the world works, or a preference about how things should be, or an opinion about what's right and wrong, and you think most people agree with you. You think your belief is the consensus view. You think people who disagree are weird or wrong or a minority. But actually, they're not. Your belief is much less universal than you think. Many people disagree with you. You just don't notice because of false consensus effect. You overestimate how many people agree with you and underestimate how many disagree. This is related to confirmation bias and the filter bubble. You're surrounded by people who are similar to you, who share your beliefs, who agree with your opinions. They're overrepresented in your social circle, in your media environment, in the information you see. So it feels like your beliefs are consensus beliefs. It feels like most people think like you. But you're in a bubble. You're in a filter. You're in a biased sample. Outside the bubble, people think differently. Outside the filter, people have different values. Outside the sample you're part of, people have different opinions. The false consensus effect means you're probably more ideologically isolated than you realize. The people you interact with probably agree with you more than the population at large. Your beliefs probably feel more universal than they actually are. This is why political polarization is so strong. Each side believes that their view is held by most people. Each side believes that the other side is a minority of crazy people. But both sides can't be right about this. At most one can be right about the other being a minority. The false consensus effect is making both sides think that their view is more widely held than it actually is. The glitch is in the invisibility of disagreement. When you live in a bubble, when you're surrounded by consensus, dissent becomes invisible. Disagreement doesn't appear. So it seems like there is no disagreement. It seems like you're expressing the obvious consensus view. Glitch 29 actor-observer bias. Something bad happens to someone else. They failed a test. They got fired. They had a car accident. What caused it? An observer would likely attribute it to something about the person. They didn't study hard. They're not competent. They're a bad driver. But the same thing happens to you. You failed a test. You got fired. You had a car accident. What caused it? You'd likely attribute it to circumstances. The test was unfair. The job market is terrible. The other driver was reckless. This is actor-observer bias. The tendency to attribute others' behaviors to their character and to attribute your own behavior to circumstances. To explain others' failures as due to who they are and your own failures as due to bad luck or bad circumstances. And the reverse for successes. Someone else succeeds. You attribute it to luck or favorable circumstances. But when you succeed, you attribute it to your own competence and effort. This bias leads to a fundamental misunderstanding of other people. You think people's failures reveal who they are. You think people who fail must be incompetent or lazy or bad at whatever they're failing at. You don't consider all the circumstantial factors that might have led to their failure. But in your own case, you know how much circumstance matters. You know that you're capable. You know that sometimes things just go wrong. You know about the bad luck and the unfair circumstances and the things outside your control. You account for all of this when explaining your own failures. The glitch is in the asymmetry. You're using different standards to explain others' behavior than you use to explain your own. You're being more charitable to yourself than to others. This leads to a kind of fundamental cruelty in how we judge each other. We see people's failures and we think they're failures of character. We don't see all the circumstances that led to the failure. We don't see the bad luck, the unfair obstacles, the factors outside their control. We just see the failure and we think that says something about who they are. Understanding actor-observer bias is important because it helps you be more compassionate. When someone fails, instead of assuming it's because they're lazy or incompetent, you can ask, what circumstances might have led to this? What factors outside their control might have contributed? The failure might say less about who they are and more about what they were dealing with. Glitch 30, the bystander effect. Imagine someone collapses in a public place. Would people help? If a person is alone with someone who needs help, they usually do help. The responsibility is clear. The need is obvious. They step in. But if there are many people around, the opposite happens. The more people who are present, the less likely any one person is to help. This is the bystander effect, the tendency to help less when other people are present. Why? Several mechanisms seem to be at work. One is diffusion of responsibility. If there are many people, the responsibility gets spread out. Each person thinks, surely someone else will help. I don't have to. So everyone waits. Everyone assumes someone else will take action, and no one does. Another mechanism is social conformity. If other people are standing around doing nothing, you conform. You stand around doing nothing. You assume that if action were needed, other people would take it. The fact that they're not taking it is evidence that action isn't needed. The bystander effect is why large groups sometimes fail to respond to emergencies. Not because people are callous, but because the social dynamics of groups make action less likely. This has dark implications for modern life. In cities with millions of people, the bystander effect is amplified. You're surrounded by people all the time, and the effect of that is that people are less likely to help each other. The presence of so many people makes each person feel less responsible. This is also why social media can be so toxic. Online, you're always in a crowd. There are always other people. So responsibility is diffused. Everyone is expecting someone else to moderate, someone else to speak up, someone else to set norms. But everyone is waiting for someone else, so norms degrade. Toxicity increases. No one takes responsibility because there are so many people. The glitch is that the presence of others changes your behavior. You become less likely to help. You become less likely to speak up. You become less likely to take responsibility. Not because you're a worse person when other people are around, but because of how group dynamics work. Understanding the bystander effect is important because it helps you recognize when you're in a group and when you're being affected by diffusion of responsibility. It helps you consciously choose to take action even when others might. It helps you realize that if you don't act, others might not either. We're reaching the midpoint of this journey. We've explored 30 glitches. We've seen how perception deceives us, how reasoning fails us, how our social instincts lead us astray. We've looked at the ways your mind constructs reality from incomplete information, and biased filters. And maybe you're starting to feel something. Maybe you're starting to feel the ground shifting under the things you were certain about. Maybe you're starting to see the cracks in your own certainty. This is good. This is what we're after. Not the destruction of your confidence, but the transformation of certainty into curiosity. Not the elimination of belief, but the development of humility. Glitch 31, the illusion of explanatory depth. You understand how a zipper works. You've used zippers thousands of times. They're simple. You slide the slider and the fabric gets caught, and then it's zipped. Easy. But if someone asks you to explain how a zipper actually works, and I mean really explain it, not just describe using one, can you? Can you explain the exact mechanics of how the slider catches the interlocking teeth and pulls them together? Can you draw a diagram? Can you explain why it works the way it does? Try it. Try to really explain how a zipper works. Most people find they don't actually understand it. They know how to use one. They understand it functionally. But they don't understand the actual mechanics. And when they try to explain it, they realize how much depth they were missing. This is the illusion of explanatory depth, the tendency to think you understand something more deeply than you actually do. You know how to use it or interact with it. You have a functional understanding, and you mistakenly think that means you have a deep understanding. You mistakenly think you really know how it works. This illusion extends to complex systems. You think you understand how the economy works. You think you understand how the government works. You think you understand how psychology works. You have a shallow understanding, a functional model. But you think it's deeper than it is. This is why people are often so confident in their opinions about complex topics they actually don't understand deeply. They have a surface-level understanding. It feels like understanding, so they become confident. And that confidence is not justified by the depth of their knowledge. This is also why experts often seem less certain than non-experts. The expert knows how deep the topic actually is. They know how much they don't know. They know about the nuances and the edge cases and the areas of active debate. So they hedge. They say things like, "It depends," and "we don't fully understand." But the non-expert has the illusion of explanatory depth. They think they understand the topic deeply, so they speak with confidence. The glitch is in the confusion between familiarity and understanding. You're familiar with zippers. You use them regularly, but you don't understand them. You're familiar with the economy. You read about it, but you don't understand it. The familiarity creates the illusion of understanding. Understanding the illusion of explanatory depth is important because it helps you be more humble about your knowledge. It helps you recognize that you don't understand things as deeply as you think. It helps you be more open to learning, and it helps you be less confident in your opinions about complex topics. Glitch 32, planification fallacy. You have a task to do. You estimate how long it will take. You think about it and you come up with a time frame. And then you work on it and it takes much longer. This happens over and over. Projects always take longer than you predict. Tasks always take more time than you estimate. You're consistently wrong, and you're consistently underestimating. This is planification fallacy, also called the planning fallacy, the tendency to underestimate how long tasks will take. Even when you have extensive experience with how long tasks take. Why does this happen? One theory is that you're planning in an idealistic state. You're imagining the task going smoothly, with no interruptions, with no obstacles. You're imagining yourself working efficiently, so your estimate reflects that idealistic scenario, but reality includes interruptions. Reality includes obstacles. Reality includes moments where you're not working efficiently. Reality includes all the things that aren't in your optimistic estimate. Another theory is that you're focusing on the specific task while ignoring the broader context. You estimate how long it takes to write a report, but you're not accounting for all the tangential tasks, responding to emails while you're writing, looking up references, revising, formatting. You're focusing on writing the report and underestimating everything else that's involved. A third theory is that you're anchoring on the first number that comes to mind. You think, this should take about 2 hours. That 2 hours is now your anchor. You search for information that confirms that anchor. You ignore information that contradicts it. Whatever the mechanism, the result is the same. Your estimates are consistently optimistic. And since you're aware that your estimates are consistently optimistic, you've experienced this over and over, you'd think you'd correct for it. But you don't. You keep making optimistic estimates. You keep being surprised when things take longer than you thought. This is sometimes called the planning fallacy, despite planning fallacy. You know you have planning fallacy. But even knowing it, you can't fully correct for it. Your estimates are still optimistic. The glitch is in the predictability of your own error. You know you underestimate. You know your own bias. But you still fall for it. Every time. Understanding planification fallacy is important because it helps you build in buffers. If you estimate 2 hours, maybe add 50%, maybe add 100%. Account for the fact that your estimate is probably optimistic. This helps you manage expectations. This helps you be more realistic about what you can accomplish. Glitch 33, optimism bias. You're less likely to experience bad things than other people. That's what your brain thinks. Bad things happen to other people, but you're protected, you're lucky, you're careful, you're smart. Things won't happen to you the way they happen to others. This is optimism bias. The tendency to believe that bad things are less likely to happen to you than to others. People underestimate their risk of car accidents. They underestimate their risk of getting sick. They underestimate their risk of getting divorced. They underestimate their risk of financial problems. They think these things happen to other people, but not them. This is different from pessimism bias. Optimism bias is about things happening to you. You're specifically less likely to experience bad things than the average person thinks they are. One reason for optimism bias is that you have more control over your life than you have over other people's lives. You're more careful than the average person. You're more aware of dangers. You're more likely to take precautions. So the bad things that happen to other people won't happen to you. Another reason is that you're exposed to more information about others' misfortunes than your own. You hear about other people's accidents, other people's illnesses, other people's failed relationships. You don't hear about your own because they haven't happened as yet. So you think bad things happen more to others. There's also the just world fallacy involved. You think that good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people. You think of yourself as a good person. So bad things won't happen to you. Other people who bad things happen to must have deserved it. The glitch is in the asymmetry. You're not just optimistic. You're optimistic about yourself relative to others. This asymmetry means that the population can't all be above average, which they are in terms of optimism bias. You're all thinking you're less likely to experience bad things than average. But by definition, not everyone can be below average. Optimism bias is good in the sense that it helps people take action despite uncertainty. If you thought you were just as likely as anyone else to fail, to get injured, to fail, you might be paralyzed. But because you think you're protected, you act, you drive, you try things, you take risks. But it can be dangerous. It can make you less vigilant about precautions. It can make you take unnecessary risks. It can make you unprepared when bad things do happen to you, as they inevitably will. Glitch 34, pessimism bias. But wait, there's also pessimism bias, the tendency to overestimate threats, to overestimate the likelihood of bad outcomes, to assume the worst will happen. So you have optimism bias, bad things are less likely to happen to you, and pessimism bias, bad things are more likely to happen than you think. Both exist. Which one wins? It depends on the context and the person. Some people are more optimistic, some people are more pessimistic. Some contexts trigger optimism, some trigger pessimism. Interestingly, a lot of people have both biases operating in different domains. They might be optimistic about their own abilities, thinking they're better drivers, better parents, better workers than average, while being pessimistic about external threats, thinking the economy will crash, thinking crime is worse than it is, thinking the world is more dangerous than it is. So you might think, I'm a careful driver and won't have an accident. But the economy is going to crash and I need to prepare for financial disaster. Both are biases. Both are distortions of reality, but they're operating in different domains, leading to a kind of inconsistent worldview. The glitch is the multiplicity of biases. You're not just biased one way. You're biased in multiple directions. You're optimistic about some things and pessimistic about others. The result is a worldview that's not actually based on reality, but on a complex interplay of biases. Glitch 35. Fundamental attribution error. Someone cuts you off in traffic. Why? Maybe they're a reckless driver. Maybe they're a bad person. Maybe they're inconsiderate. The fundamental attribution error suggests you'll blame their character. But maybe they didn't see you. Maybe they're distracted because they just got bad news. Maybe they're rushing to the hospital because someone they love is in danger. Maybe there are circumstances you're not aware of. When something bad happens, we tend to attribute it to the person's character or personality rather than to circumstances. This is the fundamental attribution error, also called correspondence bias or the actor-observer bias. Although actor-observer bias specifically refers to the asymmetry between how we explain our own behavior versus others. When you cut someone off in traffic, on the other hand, you probably explain it differently. You were distracted. You didn't see them. You're having a bad day. You blame circumstances. But when someone else cuts you off, you blame their character. They're a reckless driver. They're a bad person. This asymmetry leads to a systematic misunderstanding of other people. You're constantly overestimating the role of character and underestimating the role of circumstance. You're constantly attributing people's behavior to who they are rather than to what they're dealing with. This has real consequences for how you judge others. You think someone is lazy because they didn't accomplish something. You don't consider that they might be dealing with depression, with family crisis, with circumstances that make it harder for them to accomplish things. You think someone is unkind because they were rude to you. You don't consider that they might be in pain, might be having a terrible day, might be dealing with something that's making them less patient. The glitch is in the one-directional attribution. You're always attributing others' behavior to character and your own behavior to circumstance. You're not giving others the same grace you give yourself. Understanding the fundamental attribution error is important because it helps you be more compassionate. When someone does something bad, instead of assuming it reveals something about their character, you can ask, what might they be dealing with? What circumstances might have led to this? The behavior might say less about who they are and more about what they're going through. Glitch 36. Self-serving bias. You succeed at something. Why? You're talented. You worked hard. You're smart. You take credit. But you fail at something. Why? The test was unfair. The task was too hard. You didn't have enough time. Bad luck. Circumstances. This is self-serving bias. The tendency to take credit for successes and blame circumstances for failures. This is related to actor-observer bias, but specifically focused on how you explain your own successes versus failures. You take a self-serving approach. You interpret events in a way that serves you, that makes you look good. When you succeed, you attribute it to your own effort and ability. When you fail, you attribute it to external factors. The asymmetry makes you look better in your own mind. It protects your self-esteem. This is adaptive in some ways. If you took full responsibility for all your failures, your self-esteem would be crushed. It's good that you can contextualize failure, understand the role of circumstances, not internalize every setback. But it can also make you unable to learn from failure. If you always blame circumstances for your failures, you never examine what you might have done differently. You never take responsibility. You never improve. It also means you might take too much credit for successes. Maybe the success was due to luck. Maybe it was due to the work of others. Maybe it was due to circumstances. But you attribute it to yourself, so you might overestimate your own abilities. You might become overconfident. The glitch is in the asymmetry. You're using different standards to explain successes and failures. This feels right to you. You know when you succeeded, and you know how much work you put in. But the asymmetry means you're not accurately assessing your own abilities. Glitch 37. Imposter syndrome. You've accomplished something. You have credentials, you have experience. You have a position. And yet you feel like a fraud. You feel like you don't belong. You feel like someone is going to expose you as not actually knowing what you're doing. This is imposter syndrome. the feeling of being an imposter despite evidence of competence. People with imposter syndrome feel like their successes are due to luck or circumstances rather than their own abilities. They feel like they don't deserve their position. They feel like they're not as competent as people think they are. Interestingly, imposter syndrome is more common among high achievers. People who have done very well often feel like imposters. This is possibly because they have high standards. They know how much they don't know. They know that there are people who are better than them. So they question whether they deserve their position. It's related to the illusion of explanatory depth. The more you understand about a field, the more you understand how much you don't understand. So despite success, despite credentials, you feel uncertain. Imposter syndrome can be paralyzing. People don't take opportunities because they don't feel qualified. They don't speak up in meetings. They don't pursue advancement. They feel like frauds, and so they hold themselves back. The glitch is in the mismatch between objective evidence of competence and subjective feeling of competence. You're objectively qualified, but you feel unqualified. The evidence says you belong, but you don't feel like you belong. Understanding imposter syndrome is important because it helps you recognize when you're experiencing it. It helps you know that the feeling is not reliable information about your actual competence. You might feel like a fraud while actually being quite competent. The feeling is a bias. It's not the truth. Glitch 38. The spotlight effect, revisited. We mentioned this earlier, but it's important enough to revisit in the context of self-perception. You think people notice your flaws more than they do. You think people are thinking about you more than they are. You think you're more visible, more obvious, more exposed than you actually are. You have a stain on your shirt and you think everyone sees it. Everyone is noticing. Everyone is judging you. But they're not. Most people won't notice. If they do, they'll forget about it. You stumble when you walk into a room and you think it was the most embarrassing thing anyone's ever seen. But most people either didn't notice or forgot immediately. You say something awkward in a conversation and you think everyone will remember that for years. But they won't. They barely registered it. The spotlight effect makes you overestimate how much you're noticed, how much your flaws are visible, how much your mistakes matter to others. This is good and bad. It's good because it means people are judging you less harshly than you think. It's good because it means your embarrassment is more private than it feels. But it's bad because it can make you anxious unnecessarily. You're worried about being noticed when you're not actually being noticed. The glitch is in the assumed visibility. You feel visible, so you assume you are visible. Your anxiety feels real, so you assume everyone can see the thing you're anxious about. But they can't. Your internal experience is not broadcast. Your self-consciousness is not written on your face. Glitch 39, motivation crowding. You love something. You love writing. You love painting. You love helping people. You do it not for money, but for the joy of it, for the intrinsic satisfaction, for the meaning it provides. Then someone offers you money to do it, and something strange happens. The joy decreases. The motivation decreases. You do it less. The thing you loved is now work. This is motivation crowding, also called crowding out, the phenomenon where external rewards, money, status, praise, actually decrease intrinsic motivation. Why? Several theories exist. One is that external rewards change how you perceive the activity. You were doing it for the inherent satisfaction. Now you're doing it for the money, and the money becomes the reason. The intrinsic motivation gets crowded out. Another theory is that external rewards feel controlling. When you do something for its own sake, you feel autonomous. You're doing it because you want to. But when there's money involved, it feels like someone else is controlling your behavior. It feels less autonomous, and the perceived loss of autonomy decreases motivation. This is a real phenomenon that's been documented in many studies. When you introduce external rewards for an activity, the intrinsic motivation often decreases. The glitch is in the assumption that more rewards means more motivation. You'd think adding money to something you love doing would make you love it more. But it often makes you love it less. The external reward crowds out the internal satisfaction. This has implications for how we structure work and incentives. If you want people to be motivated, to care, to do good work, adding more money might actually make them less motivated. It might crowd out the intrinsic motivation that was there. Glitch 40, the peak end rule. You have an experience. Let's say you go to the dentist. You're in the chair for 20 minutes. Most of it is unpleasant but bearable. There's one moment when the dentist hits a nerve and it's very painful. That's the peak. Then it ends. How much did you suffer? Well, the average pain level was moderate, but you don't remember it that way. You remember the peak, when the nerve was hit. You remember the end, when it stopped. You don't remember the middle, the bulk of the experience. So you remember it as more painful than it actually was. The peak pain is weighted more heavily than it should be, and the ending matters more than it should. This is the peak end rule. The tendency to judge an experience based on its peak moment and its ending, rather than on the average of the whole experience. This means that how you remember an experience is not based on how much you actually suffered or enjoyed it. It's based on the worst or best moment and how it ended. This is why endings matter so much. Why the ending of a movie can determine how much you enjoyed the whole movie. Why how a date ends determines whether you want another date. Why how a conversation ends can determine how you feel about the whole relationship. If something ends badly, you'll remember the whole thing as bad. If it ends well, you'll remember the whole thing as good, even if the average was different. This is also why the last day of a vacation is important. If the last day is terrible, the whole vacation feels ruined. If the last day is great, the whole vacation feels great. The ending disproportionately shapes your memory. The glitch is in the weighting. You're not giving equal weight to all moments. You're overweighting peaks and endings and underweighting the middle. So your memory of an experience is not an accurate reflection of the experience. Understanding the peak end rule is important because it helps you make decisions about how to structure experiences. If you want people to remember an experience fondly, make sure it ends well. If you want to enjoy something despite some pain or difficulty, end it on a good note. The ending will be what you remember. Glitch 41, illusion of control. Something happens. You did something. Therefore, you caused it to happen. You rolled the dice and got a 6. You influenced the roll somehow. You had some control over the outcome. This is the illusion of control. The tendency to believe that you have more control over events than you actually do, especially over random events. People roll dice and try different techniques, different release points, different spins, believing that they can influence the outcome. They can't. The outcome is random. But the illusion of control makes them believe they can. People believe that certain actions will influence random events. If they wear their lucky shirt, the dice will be more likely to come up the number they want. If they perform a certain ritual, the plane won't crash. If they do a certain thing, the person they're in love with will fall in love with them back. The reality is that many things are outside your control. Other people's emotions are outside your control. Random events are outside your control, but you have an illusion that you control more than you do. This is adaptive in some contexts. If you believe you have control, you're more likely to take action, to try, to persist. The illusion of control can be motivating, but it can also be paralyzing and anxiety-provoking. If you believe you have control over things you don't actually control, you start feeling responsible for things that aren't your responsibility. If your friend is sad, you might feel like you caused it or could fix it. If something bad happens, you might feel like it's your fault. The glitch is in the assumption of causation. You assume that because you did something, and then something else happened, you caused it. But correlation is not causation, and your action might have had nothing to do with the outcome. Understanding the illusion of control is important because it helps you recognize the limits of your control. It helps you distinguish between the things you can influence and the things you can't. And it helps you release responsibility for things that aren't your responsibility. Glitch 42, Semmelweis reflex. A doctor named Ignaz Semmelweis observed that childbed fever was killing many mothers after childbirth. He discovered that doctors who washed their hands before delivery had much lower rates of the disease. So he insisted that his colleagues wash their hands. His colleagues refused. They rejected the evidence. not because it wasn't convincing, but because it contradicted their existing beliefs about how medicine worked. It was offensive to suggest that they were carrying disease. It violated established medical practice. So they rejected the evidence. This is Semmelweis' reflex. The tendency to reject new evidence that contradicts established beliefs. To reject evidence not because it's weak, but because it challenges what you already believe. This is different from confirmation bias, which is about how you interpret ambiguous evidence. Semmelweis' reflex is about outright rejection of evidence. Even strong evidence. Even evidence that should be obviously true. You reject it because it contradicts your worldview. This happens in medicine. New treatments are rejected because they contradict established treatments. People reject evidence that their favorite foods are unhealthy. People reject evidence that their cherished beliefs are false. The reflex is to reject the evidence. Galileo faced this. He provided evidence that the Earth moved around the sun. The evidence was strong, but it contradicted established beliefs, so it was rejected. For centuries, despite the evidence, the glitch is in the protection of existing beliefs. Your mind isn't designed to maximize truth. It's designed to maximize coherence, to maintain the worldview you already have. So when new evidence threatens that worldview, your reflex is to reject it, not to update your beliefs. Understanding Semmelweis' reflex is important because it helps you recognize when you might be experiencing it. When you find yourself rejecting evidence strongly, rejecting it viscerally, ask yourself, am I rejecting this because it's weak evidence or because it threatens my existing beliefs? Am I experiencing Semmelweis' reflex? Glitch 43, ostrich effect. You get a bill in the mail. You know it's probably a bill you'll have to pay. You know it will probably have bad news, so you don't open it. You put it aside, you avoid it. You don't want to know. This is the ostrich effect. The tendency to avoid information because it might be negative. To bury your head in the sand and pretend the problem isn't there. The ostrich effect gets its name from the Sebas false belief that ostriches bury their heads when they see danger. They don't, of course. But the metaphor captures something true about human behavior. We sometimes hide from problems instead of facing them. You don't check your bank account balance because you're afraid of what you'll find. You don't go to the doctor because you don't want to know if something's wrong. You don't read the news because you don't want to be depressed. You avoid the information that might confirm your fears. The problem is that the problem doesn't go away by avoiding it. The bill gets more overdue, the medical condition gets worse, the situation deteriorates, but you feel better because you're not facing it. You're not receiving the information that would make you anxious. The ostrich effect is a form of avoidance coping. It feels good in the short term. You're not anxious about the problem, but it's bad in the long term. The problem gets worse while you're avoiding it. The glitch is in the short-term relief. Avoiding the information feels good, but it's preventing you from addressing the problem. It's making the situation worse. Understanding the ostrich effect is important because it helps you recognize when you might be avoiding information. It helps you ask yourself, what am I not looking at? What information am I avoiding? And what would happen if I faced it? Glitch 44, the focusing effect. You learn that something bad might happen in a certain time frame. You might get sick. You might lose your job. You focus on that possibility. It dominates your attention. It becomes the most important thing. You can't think about anything else. But then the time frame passes and nothing happens. Or something does happen, but it turns out to be manageable. And you realize that you focused so intensely on this one possibility that it completely dominated your mental landscape. It made you miserable, and it might not have been worth the mental real estate. This is the focusing effect. The tendency to overweight one piece of information and underweight others. To focus so intensely on one thing that it dominates everything else. If you learn that you might have cancer, you focus on cancer. That possibility consumes your attention. But the probability of cancer, when you do the math, might be quite low. And there are many other things that could happen, many of which are more likely. But cancer has captured your attention and it dominates. The focusing effect is why people are so worried about terrorist attacks, even though the probability is extremely low. One piece of information, terrorist attack, dominates the mental landscape. It gets focused on intensely, and the focusing makes it seem more likely, more important, more worthy of concern than it actually is. The glitch is in the capture of attention. One thing gets focused on, and it becomes disproportionately important. It crowds out other considerations. It makes you miserable unnecessarily. Understanding the focusing effect is important because it helps you step back. It helps you ask, am I focusing too intensely on one possibility? Are there other things I should be considering? Should this be taking up this much of my mental space? Glitch 45, recency bias revisited. We discussed this before, but it's important enough to revisit. You had a great week, and now one thing goes wrong. One bad day, and suddenly you feel like everything is going wrong. The bad day is recency. It's recent. It's in your mind. So it dominates how you feel about the week. You had a great conversation with someone, but then you had an awkward conversation. The awkward conversation is recent, so you're worried that the relationship is damaged. You're not thinking about all the good conversations. You're thinking about the one awkward one. You were doing well on a diet, but then you ate something unhealthy. One slip, and now you feel like you've failed the whole diet. You're thinking about the slip because it's recent. It's dominating your sense of progress. Recency bias makes the most recent information the most salient. It dominates your thinking, and it can make temporary setbacks feel like total failures. One bad day feels like a bad week. One awkward moment feels like a ruined relationship. One slip feels like a failed diet. The glitch is in the weighting. Recent information gets weighted too heavily. It crowds out the older, broader context. Glitch 46, the Stroop effect. You see the word blue printed in red ink. Your task is to say the color of the ink. It's red. But your mind has registered the word blue, and it interferes with your ability to say red. You hesitate. You slow down. There's a conflict. This is the Stroop effect. When two pieces of information conflict, it takes more cognitive effort to process them. The automatic reading of the word interferes with the intentional task of naming the color. This shows how automatic some of your processes are. You read automatically. You don't have to think about reading. It just happens. And when reading conflicts with another task, reading wins. It interferes. This has implications for how your mind processes information. A lot of what you do is automatic. You process information automatically, interpret things automatically, make judgments automatically. And when these automatic processes conflict with intentional processes, you struggle. This is why advertising works. The message is automatic. It processes without you having to think about it, and it interferes with your intentional decision-making. The glitch is in the automatic interference. You can't turn off the automatic processing. You can't turn off reading. You can't turn off the automatic interpretation of things. And when these automatic processes conflict with what you're trying to do, they interfere. They slow you down. They create conflict. Understanding the Stroop effect is important because it helps you recognize that you're not always in control of your own processing. A lot happens automatically, and sometimes that automation interferes with your intentions. Glitch 47, attentional blink. You're looking for something specific. You're on high alert. You're looking for a target. You see it. You've spotted it. But immediately after, there's a second target, and you miss it. Your attention blinks. There's a gap in consciousness. This is attentional blink. After you've focused intensely on something, there's a brief period where you're less able to attend to new things. Your attention has blinked off. This is why people sometimes miss things in rapid succession. They see the first thing but not the second thing that comes right after. Their attention can't switch fast enough. This happens in real life. Someone calls your name twice in rapid succession, and you hear it once but not the second time. Two things happen quickly, and you process the first but not the second. Your attention blinks and you miss it. The glitch is in the limitation of attention. You think you're paying attention to everything, but your attention has limits. It can't process everything fast enough, so things get missed. Attentional blinks happen without you knowing it. Glitch 48, the continuity error. You watch a scene in a movie. There's a cup on the table. Then there's a cut to a different angle, and the cup has moved, but you don't notice. Your mind assumes continuity. Your mind assumes that the cup was on the table the whole time. Your mind fills in the gap with continuity. This is the continuity illusion. Your mind assumes that the world is continuous, that objects stay in place unless you see them move, that people stay who they are unless you see them change, that the world is basically stable. But the world is not always continuous. Things change, objects get moved, people change. The world is not as stable as your mind assumes. Your mind is constructing continuity. It's filling in gaps. It's assuming that what was true a moment ago is still true now. And usually this assumption works. Usually things are continuous. Usually the cup is still on the table. But sometimes the assumption is wrong. Sometimes things have changed and you don't notice because your mind assumes continuity. This is the glitch. Your mind is actively constructing a sense of continuity. It's not passively perceiving continuity. It's creating it. And when the continuity doesn't actually exist, you still perceive it anyway because your mind is too powerful at constructing coherence. Glitch 49, the grand illusion. You look at a scene. You feel like you're seeing everything in high detail. You feel like you have a complete visual representation of what's in front of you. Every object, every detail, all visible, but you're not. Your vision is not like a camera. You don't see everything with equal detail. You only see the center of your visual field in detail. The periphery is blurry. And even the center, even where you're looking directly, you don't see as much detail as you think. This is sometimes called the grand illusion. The illusion that you see the world in complete, detailed clarity, when actually you're seeing only a tiny part with detail and filling in the rest with assumptions and memory. What's more strange? Your mind is so good at filling in the details that you feel like you're seeing them. You feel like you're seeing the whole scene in perfect detail. But if you close your eyes and try to recall the specific details, you can't. You can't remember what was on the far side of the scene. You can't remember the specific details of objects you weren't looking directly at. Your mind was constructing details that your eyes weren't actually perceiving. Your visual experience felt complete, but it was actually constructed. The glitch is in the completeness of the illusion. Your visual experience feels like complete perception. It feels like you're seeing everything, but you're actually seeing only a small part and your mind is constructing the rest. Glitch 50, the continuity assumption. And finally, we arrive at the 50th glitch. It's related to all the others. It's the glitch that underlies many of the others. It's the assumption that you are continuous. That the person you are now is the same person you were yesterday. That you have a stable identity that persists through time. But are you really the same person? Your cells are constantly dying and being replaced. Your beliefs change, your values change, your personality changes, your preferences change. The person you are now is not the same person you were 10 years ago. If you're constantly changing, constantly being replaced at the cellular level, constantly evolving psychologically, in what sense are you the same person? In what sense do you have a continuous identity, yet you experience yourself as continuous? You have a sense of self that feels stable, that feels like it persists through time. You have continuity of consciousness. You remember being the person you were yesterday, and you feel like you're the same person. But that continuity might be an illusion. Your mind might be constructing a sense of continuity the way it constructs visual continuity. It might be filling in gaps, creating coherence, constructing a unified self out of discrete moments that are actually quite different from each other. The glitch is in the deepest assumptions about reality. You assume you're a stable self moving through time. You assume your identity is continuous. But these assumptions might be constructions. They might be illusions that your mind is creating. This is perhaps the most profound glitch. Because if your sense of self is an illusion, if your continuity is constructed, if you are not actually a stable being persisting through time, then what are you? You're a process. You're a pattern of organization that's constantly shifting, constantly changing, constantly dying and being renewed. You're a narrative that your mind is constructing moment by moment. You're a story that feels like truth but might be something else entirely. The end and the beginning. 50 glitches. 50 ways your mind is probably getting things wrong right now. 50 systematic errors in how you perceive reality, how you reason about the world, how you understand yourself and others. And you've made it through. You've spent these hours descending into the strange, broken machinery of your own consciousness. You've seen the glitches up close. You've watched how they operate. And now, in this moment, as the night settles deeper, you might feel something shifting. You might feel the ground beneath your certainties becoming less solid. The things you were sure about becoming less sure. The way you saw yourself becoming less clear. But here's the thing, this is not a disaster. This is not a collapse of meaning. This is the beginning of something else. This is the beginning of wisdom. Wisdom is not certainty. Wisdom is not the accumulation of correct beliefs. Wisdom is the recognition of uncertainty. Wisdom is the understanding that you're operating with limited information, with systematic biases, with a mind that's constantly constructing reality from incomplete data. Wisdom is the humility to ask questions, to seek out information that contradicts your beliefs, to listen to people who disagree with you, not to mock them or defeat them, but to understand them, to recognize that your perspective is one perspective among many, to recognize that you might be wrong. Wisdom is the compassion to extend to others the same grace you extend to yourself, to recognize that when people do bad things, they might be doing them under circumstances you don't understand, to recognize that their behavior might reflect their situation more than their character, to give people the benefit of the doubt the way you give yourself the benefit of the doubt. Wisdom is the integration of all this knowledge, knowledge of the glitches, knowledge of the biases, knowledge of how your mind works, without becoming paralyzed by it. You can't eliminate these biases. You can't turn off your perception filters. You can't become a perfectly rational being, and you shouldn't try, because many of these bugs are actually features. They're shortcuts that work most of the time. They're necessary for navigating a world that's too complex to perceive directly. But knowing the bugs means you can correct for them. You can build in the corrections. You can ask the right questions. You can seek out the information you need. You can be more careful about the things you believe with absolute certainty. Most importantly, knowing the bugs means you can extend compassion to yourself. You can stop expecting yourself to be a perfect reasoner. You can stop being so hard on yourself for the mistakes you make, the things you misunderstand, the ways you're wrong about things. Because you're not uniquely broken. You're just human. You're using the same imperfect tools that everyone else is using. You're operating with the same systematic biases that everyone shares. So as you drift towards sleep, as this night deepens into early morning, as your eyes grow heavy and your mind softens, hold this knowledge gently, not as a burden, but as a comfort. You're not broken, you're not stupid, you're not uniquely mistaken, you're simply human. And humanity is beautifully, mysteriously broken in very specific ways. The glitches are real, but so is your capacity to recognize them, to learn from them, to be a little wiser for knowing about them. The ground beneath your certainties is less solid than you thought, but that's okay. Solid ground was never what you needed. What you needed was the willingness to stand on uncertain ground with grace and curiosity. Thank you for this journey. Thank you for spending these hours exploring the strange landscape of your own mind. Thank you for the curiosity that brought you here and kept you listening. Good night.